Good Monday morning, everybody. It is very early Monday morning. And as I have told you with my channel updates, these are probably the only times I'll be able to do this, with a few exceptions here and there, like let's say this past week. Anyway, got another round of some Sonic fan editorials, if you will, or rants, whatever you want to call them. Now, this one that I have here was done 2 days and 16 hours ago. But this one is entitled, the individual entitled this one, Why the Weaponization Equals Vivisecation, or whatever it is. Vivisecation. Whatever. Vivisection. Anyway, that's basically the title of the entry, the journal they put in. And this is what they said. And I quote, going to start right at the subject. And this is what they said. Mecha Sally getting weaponized. Now, we've all been pushing the idea that what happened to Sally at the end of issue 232, was too dark for the comic, simply because she's standing there, conscious, while Eggman takes a blowtorch to her face. Now, since we know that Robians have their senses intact and are simply unable to control their bodies and even what they say. I added that part in. But this is somebody else's. I'll provide a link down below if you guys want to read it. And yes, it's from a certain group that's been, basically not really doing the comic many favors. But hey, like I joined it because, like I say, I'm a fan of everything Sonic. I'm even part of the Archie Sonic group. Go figure. Anyway, continuing on with what this individual said, and I quote: Now, since we know that Robians have their senses intact and are simply unable to control their bodies, so Sally was not only forced to watch her body get carved up, but she was also able to feel it. Yeah, what the blank? Was this really necessary? No, of course not. There was absolutely no bloody reason to do this. Sally's death at the start of the Genesis Wave 1, was unnecessary, yes. But at least it did raise the tension a bit. This, on the other hand, there are some things that you don't put in stories like this. Yes, one of them is take a blowtorch to a hero's face while she stands there, unable to stop it from happening, unable to see it coming and feel what happens to her. That's just barbaric. While I do hate 172 more than the Mecha Sally arc, this event is without a doubt the worst thing Flynn has ever produced for the comic. Especially since, like 172, it was entirely unnecessary. If Sally was able to perform as she does in the comic without weaponizing, I could buy that. It wouldn't be badly written. In fact, it would be better if she wasn't weaponized, since then it wouldn't be a case of her being the worst ultimate weapon ever. Now, recently, the idea has been passed around that she was not cut apart. A reason that I, reading this fellow fans or individual's editorial, agree on. And continuing on what they said, and I quote, Now, recently, the idea has been passed around that she was not cut apart, but instead, her weaponizing is actually just a shell added to her. And if one were to remove it, her form from 230 to 232 would be found underneath. Now, I would love to believe this, and I, reading this, do believe it, or have a feeling about it. But continuing on, and I quote, "Now, I would love to believe this and go along with this theory, except for a few things." And they count down the few things that deteriorates or deters them from knowing that this could be a reality, or knowing this could be the reason why she has this weaponized look. This is the reasons. Number one, and I quote, "Eggman uses a blowtorch. You could say that he used it to weld the armor on, but she's still going to feel that. 2. Her proportions and size do not differ that heavily from her base form. If anything, her feet are smaller. Furthermore, her new shell is much smoother to look at, with her lips completely merging together when her mouth is closed. It is also riddled with ports that can open up for her new weapons. If it was simply added armor, then there would not be enough space to contain all her weapons." Again, folks, we do not know that. 3. On a similar path, the brain laser. Now, adding a hidden gun to her head. Okay, on a similar path, the brain laser. Now, adding a hidden gun to her head is not simply a case of adding a barrel and being done with it. She also needs the firing mechanisms, the power supply / ammo, the cooling systems, pistons, and hinges to lift up her hair so that the gun can extend out, etc., which all boils down to a distinct lack of space in her head for other things like, I don't know, a brain / processor. And this just happens to be the lead-in for the introduction of the girly-looking Sega Sally, who seems to have no problem with wearing the remains of her Mecha Sally shell as clothing, despite where it came from. Yeah, maybe that explains it. And what they're saying basically right there is what they feel is with Eggman putting the laser gun in her head, that he removed her brain and thus made her die. No, I don't think so. Alright, number 4. The fourth reason, and I quote, "Again we have something similar, the power ring matrix. Now, aside from the stupidity of Eggman being able to just find a quote-unquote modified power ring, how the blank do you modify a gold hoop of metal and energy? With Flynn brand plot convenience, of course. That somehow reinforces brainwashing instead of curing it, then being able to replace it with another ring that was actually used to de-brainwash someone, Monkey Kong in this case, with no ill effects. This thing is all that's powering Mecha Sally. Anything that normally would be doing this job is not present, which generally amounts to her roboticized heart. This part has either been disconnected or removed entirely. Otherwise, she would still been able to keep fighting after the ring died. Oh yes, after about a week, the ring burns out, severely limiting her lifespan from now on. This is also despite the fact that when someone, usually Sonic, actually uses a ring power as opposed to just using it to shield against mind control, it tends to burn out in about 30 seconds, and yet Eggman decides to use one which he only has one of to power Mecha Sally? The only reason she's not lying on a table with her torso opened up while Eggman tries to find another ring is because he just happened to be fighting the one character in the whole book with a power ring on his person. Number 5. The presence of things like the brain laser and the power ring matrix within Sally's body. Okay, number 5. The presence of things like the brain laser and the power ring matrix within Sally's body means that he had to cut her open to get them in. The brain laser is inside her head. He had to at least scalp her to get it in, and he had to disconnect the original robo heart and squeeze the power ring matrix in there. 6. There are too many cosmic changes. Cosmetic. Okay. There are too many cosmetic changes to her head, like the completely smooth face and muzzle, the lack of eyelids, and the completely different hair shape, which is lower than her original, leaving even less space for the brain laser, etc., show that he has obviously modified her actual body. So there you have it. 6 reasons why Mecha Sally Mark III is the darkest, most out-of-place thing in the whole run of the comic. And they put a face palm. Now, I know a lot of people are going to disagree with that, and I don't blame some people for doing that. And here's why. Because, like many of those fans, I don't believe Ian Flynn would do that. Basically, that final panel that we saw in 232, or whatever you want to call it, 232 I believe, that final panel, well, you had the blowtorch and everything, was just for speculation and assumption. A lot of comic books do that. A lot of comic book companies do that with their comics. Some of the big hit comics like X-Men, Spider-Man, from Marvel. You got Wildcats from Image. DC has done it with Justice League and Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and Supergirl. I mean, they've done similar things. Not, take a blowtorch to a roboticized, to the hero's roboticized face. No. But they've done things that have been similar in final panels in certain issues that have always led to speculation, have always led to assumption, and always been left up to the imagination. True, a lot of fans looking at it in this way, look at it with that dark imagination, with that fear, with that dark imagination and speculation that did happen. That they assume that this is what happened, but they don't know that. The only way that it could ever be truly revealed as to what happened is if either Ian Flynn comes out and says exactly how she became this way, or he writes it down somewhere in a future story arc or side story where she explains basically what happened to herself or what Eggman did to her and why she looks the way she does. That's the only way we'll find out anything. But until that time comes, until Ian Flynn says, hey, look, this is what really happened, or until he writes a story to where Sally herself explains, then and only then can we just look at it with speculation. Then and only then, and until that time comes, we can only look at that final panel, that blowtorch to the face deal, with speculation, imagination, and assumption. We cannot go on record and actually say he did this without having any proof. Now, I know some people will say, well, what more proof do you need? Laser gun, this, that, blades, what more proof do you need? And I understand you guys pointing that out, but again, we don't really know the truth now, do we? We don't really know the truth. My speculation on this is if she ends up wearing, as a lot of people have said, the redesigned look that many people pointed out comes from this weaponization, that storyline wise, I feel Ian Flynn's going to have her wear it as a reminder of what Eggman did to her and give her the motivation to want to finally defeat Eggman and be rid of him. That would be the only reason. But again, until we find out either from Ian Flynn himself or until he writes it into a story, side story or story arc, as exactly what happened to her and how she became weaponized, we can only assume and speculate and leave it up to the imagination. And like I said, like I said, I know people are going to say, well, what more proof do you need? Have you not seen what she's done? Yes, I have. But it does not mean he did what a lot of people assume he did. And like I said, until Ian Flynn comes out and either explains it himself in a chat or he puts it and makes a story out of it, side story or story arc, we won't know until that time comes. So that's just my reply on what this person had to say. This is just my reply, folks. Excuse me. Okay, there are going to be some I'm not going to read, but I will provide a link down below so you guys can read them yourself. One is called Crossover Filler. The other is my take on the Sonic is not heartless. Blaze's Defense 2 at All Girls Club, or whatever it is. And those are going to be some of them I might provide a link to. But if I don't, those are just the titles you can find at DeviantArt. Google them too, and you might just, and take your time to read them if you want. Now I did kind of copy and paste that weaponization editorial, if you will, and provided it at the Sega Forums and Sonic Stadium. And before I get into this next part, I will acknowledge that yes, what this fan and many fans are assuming could have happened, yes, I admit maybe what they assume and speculate could have happened, I admit may not have been as dark as what we've seen with the Dark Mobius Silver arc in Universe, if not the 8 Grape situation with the Echidnas. I get that. I understand that. So I acknowledge that. I mean, I was surprised they even allowed what happened. They even allowed that final panel, that final page in the first part of the Silver arc / Dark Mobius arc to even be shown. I was surprised by that, to be quite honest with you. Alright, now here's an individual, and again, one of his editorials will be posted in a link if I provide it. But this one is called Mecha Sally and Shameful Archie. And this is what, if I can hold this up, this is what this individual has to say about it. They say, and I quote, "Okay, Sally's mecha design. Everyone has pretty much got it covered, so here's my outlook on it. I hate it. For some reason, looking back when I first read that issue, the fact of what Eggman didn't sink in, probably since I didn't have much info myself on how Robians are / behave or operate. But given the information I have gained from other fans, I'm truly disturbed by how this story was written for her. First off, Ian, the way this was done, it was needless and heartless. It would be better to have given Metal Sally some kind of chip that would keep her in this state, or even some added armor, which I believe he did. But continuing on, I quote, having her carved up, knowing full well Robians can feel pain in her life, is sick and twisted, and you can't fool when I know most writers of the comic are fully aware of the characters' continuities, stories between them, and so on, as well as how elements in the world work. This was not something that should be in a Sonic comic. This is something I'd expect from an anime. Now, another thing I want to talk on is Silver and his conclusion of Sally being the traitor. It was pointless. Think about it. Silver's trying to find out who the traitor was, and his mistakes on who it was were nothing but added filler confrontations for different stories. I don't think Silver would be this stupid. And to go to someone from the past to look for a traitor that will soon to be doesn't make sense. Here's why. If there was a traitor in Sonic's present time, what traces would be left if the crimes they commit that result in Silver's future have not yet happened? What would there be a trace? Who did Owl talk to, or where did he look to find the answers for Silver? All of these solutions were given with no context or problem, and all in the end result of it being Mecha Sally? In reality, I can see how it would make some kind of point, Sally not being herself, and she just went crazy. But here's the main point where it falls apart. The crossover at the end of 247. The time shift happens beginning the crossover. And once that's over, we're going back to Archie Sonic. And it will not have continuity to what happened in the last issues because you're removing characters, changing events around, and streamlining the story, which in turn contracts how Silver came to solution in the first place. Now, this is really still up in the air depending on how the story picks up again once the crossover is done, but my guess is this is the type of outcome we will have, if not close. Elements that contract one another. Now, one way they might try to save themselves is have another retread of issue 247 from a different manner in a poor attempt to make some kind of sense, which I'm willing to put money down will be poor at best. Back on Mecha Sally. Again, this type of execution in writing was too grim, dark, and pointless. And I'm disappointed in Archie for letting something like this get away in the comic. And Ian should have known this. There was no excuse for this to happen to Sally. There was no excuse for Eggman to play surgeon on her when there were other ways this could have been done. In reality, I wish Mecha Sally never happened at all. I can go on more, but as I said, others have touched on this well enough. I just felt I should throw my words out there as well. Archie, it's utter shameful for 19 years you ran the comic to the best of writing, but the last 4 years, the characters are becoming tools, adored characters, becoming abused and bullied, and you're acting as if it means nothing to you as a professional comic studio. As a professional comic studio, you should have done better by your fans and by the public. Not just for us as fans, but by yourself as a publisher. This is probably the worst event to happen to Sally since Sally's death. Stop abusing everyone. As for Ian Flynn, as a writer, he needs to be slapped in the face and told that these are not his characters to do as he pleases. This is not his story to make into whatever. This is not how you make a story, and the crossover is nothing but a bucket of mud for us to swallow to give us a break from this piss that is the main story. But again, I blame more Archie for letting something like this pass than I do Ian for writing it, because what does that say about Archie? And he posted this 15 hours, 27 minutes ago. Okay. Let me kind of put it to you like this. Let me kind of answer a few questions here. Let me answer a few questions. First of all, well, not a few questions, but let me kind of give my few cents on this, all right? First of all, let me explain this. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I understand people want to believe this and want to feel that that behind the scenes, if you will, Sally was carved up, blah, blah, blah. I get that. And again, like I said, it's all up to speculation, imagination, and assumption. And until Ian Flynn comes out and says it himself of exactly what happened to her and why she and how she was weaponized, or until he writes it down in a side story or story arc for Sonic Universe or the main comic, then we're never going to know what really happened. We can only assume, speculate, and imagine. Now, I get that some people, like the first one I read, they kind of look at the fact that, all right, one of the main problems they have with it is the power ring deal. It's like, okay, where the blank, as they called it, did he find a power ring that he can easily modify? How in the world did he find one of those? And why in the world did Sally not gain her free will when Ken gave her hers, or gave her his? Again, I can understand some fans' speculation on that. I mean, how some fans feel about that and kind of have those questions. I get that, and I understand that. But again, we won't really know the answer. And you know what? Sometimes a modified power ring doesn't just have to be a life force or life source, which apparently it is, but it can be like a main battery. Like, let's say you talk about the roboticized heart. It could be connected to the heart, basically, if you will. And that by being overused, it's like she's having a heart attack. Or her heart just stops and it goes out. So when the power ring dies out, her heart dies out. End of story. But again, we don't really know all the details yet. And like I said, until Ian Flynn says, hey, this is what really happened, or writes it in the story, all we can really do is speculate and assume what he did. That's all we can do. We can't say anything else. We can only speculate. Unless, like I said, we have proof, real proof, and I'm not talking about what we're reading in the comics. I'm talking actual, down-to-earth proof. Basically, like, oh, this was a page, like, let's say a sketch page by Tracy Yardlin or Ben Bates that says, oh, yeah, he wanted us to add this in there as a flashback where, you know, you see Eggman doing this to Sally, making her into the weaponized version of herself. Unless someone has actual proof like that, we can only speculate. And it can't be and the proof cannot just be what we see and read in the issues. It can't be. I mean, how do I put this? It's kind of like with Oz, okay? It's kind of like with the new Oz movie. You know, I recently rented it. I gotta make a copy of it through DVD Fab later. But it's through this movie. That we see how the Wicked Witch of the West came to be. Now, we don't know how she came to be at first. Right? We don't know how she came to be at first. All right? Let's say you watch the original movie right off the bat, the classic 1930s movie. We don't know how the Wicked Witch came to be. You go and see the movie. You go and see the musical Wicked. You kind of get an idea. But when you take a look at this movie, Oz, which is a prequel, you pretty much find out how the Wicked Witch came to be. I know it's kind of a weird example of what I'm saying, but what I'm trying to point out is you could only speculate when you first see the original of how she came to be. You don't know exactly how the Wicked Witch came to be. And this prequel gives you an idea of how it happened. It shows you what happened. It gives you the proof of how she came to be. And the thing is, like I said, that's the same thing with Sally. We don't know what happened to her until we have actual proof. Until we have actual proof of how she came to be. And we're not just and I'm not talking, those last panels where he's putting the last adjustments on her and he's putting the modified power ring into her. I'm not talking that either. I'm talking basically down to the fact of whether or not we see how it was done. Again, all that we could do is speculate and assume and imagine. And like I said, the proof cannot be what you just read and see. It's kind of like with the trailer for Smurfs 2. Some of the trailers. One of the scenes in the trailer has Smurfette floating down a river on a log or something, and she's starting to change color into that of a naughty and become evil. Now we can assume a few things. We can assume that this does actually happen. Or two, we can assume that she's having a nightmare, a dream of her becoming like that. Or three, we can assume that it's something that, let's say, Papa Smurf foresees in a dream. That's all we can think of. That's all we can think and imagine and speculate until we see the movie, until we actually go and see the movie in a few weeks. That's all we could. That's all we can speculate and do. But like I said, we don't know exactly what happened to her, to Sally. We don't know if she just got armored on, got weaponized armor on her, put on her. We don't know if she was taken apart. We don't know that until we find out from the horse's mouth itself, or until the horse himself puts it in writing and in physical form in the comic as a side story or a main story arc. That's all we could do. So, that's all I'm going to say on it. Let me know what you guys think down below. Comment if you like. Video responses are greatly appreciated. I'm sorry this was long, but I just had to read off what these two individuals had to say. And also just get it off my chest, because get what I had to say off my chest, because folks, nobody's perfect. Ken Penders, Ian Flynn, Carl Bowlers, none of them are perfect. They're all going to have the detractors, they're all going to have the critics, they're all going to have the fans, and they're all going to have their haters, they're all going to have the cheerers and all that. Nobody's perfect. They're all going to have their own way of writing a story and writing characters. Nobody's perfect. So, until then, comment below. Video response if you like. Comments are welcomed. And you all have a good day. I'll talk to you all later. And sorry this video was long. Or audio video was long.